we are exactly a month away from Apple's March event, probably. So, here's what we're going to see at it. Probably. I'm Magsafe Dave and I simplify Apple so that everything just works for you, and if you want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours every weekday at 1300 UTC, like the video, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. And let's start with the safest of bets, and then we'll get into the more interesting and less certain things as we go. First of all, the iPhone SE 3. As time's gone on, this has evolved from being basically an iPhone XR with an A15 inside and Touch ID in the button on the side, to basically being the exact same phone that we had 2 years ago, but with a faster chip and 5G. Even what could have been shoe-in features like adding Magsafe looks to be less and less likely at this point. One thing that is slightly unexpected that now looks to be coming though is a better main camera, though it remains to be seen if this is an actual hardware upgrade in terms of sensor and lenses, or just going to be better pictures because of the computational photography that the new SoC upgrade can bring. But regardless, better pictures are better pictures. Now, if I was bringing out the iPhone SE, what would I do differently? I'd probably be tempted to go with that XR option that left the range last year at $100 more than the last SE and had real Face ID, no home button and more. Sticking the latest chip and Magsafe, and you know what? Make it the first portless iPhone to boot. With Magsafe being the only charging option, and along with it being the cheapest, probably people would be more forgiving to it having no port, and probably provide a puck in the box though. Bear in mind though, these are my thoughts on what I think Apple should do, not what I expect them to do. Next up, the iPad Air 5. This is kind of behind the pack at the moment because it's the only iPad without center stage. Yes, I am slightly salty that I have the last version, and to be honest, I still don't understand why Apple would intentionally update these every 18 months when the chips come out every 12 months. It just makes no sense to me at all. Beyond a chip bump and the center stage camera and perhaps 5G coming to these, it'll be a pretty minor upgrade though, I think. Although Apple might offer some bolder colours too, as the one I have from last year is supposedly blue, I think is the official name for it. You never really see it though and not think it was basically either space grey or silver. And to be honest, I have seen some rumours that these might be getting a camera bump as well, potentially to a dual camera system as in the iPad Pro 11-inch. But I honestly don't see that happening. I don't think people use the cameras on their iPads enough for this to be a massive issue for people. Third of all, there are more iPads that have been registered. These could be country specific, but it seems that these are likely to be an update to the base model. It might simply be that Apple are realigning their release schedule to place these in an annual spring release going forward, so moving to the A14 chip. Perhaps that means they lag behind the main iPhone chips by 18 months rather than full 2 years. But having the newer iPad chip available at this time of year might actually be a boon for Apple's education sector sales, as well as the back-to-school season that kicks in around May to June. This one's less certain, but the EEC filings do point to it being on the way. The other possibility, of course, is that the base-level iPad finally gets that upgrade to the iPad Air 3/10.5-inch iPad Pro form factor. We've heard about this for a little while. It is a slightly slimmer design. It does have a display that is laminated onto the touch interface glass as well at the front, which a lot of people really want. I'm personally very, very pleased, having had a breakage in our house of one of the latest generation base models, that it was only the touch sensor panel that got broken, so this ended up being a £27 replacement instead of probably into the range of $150, half the price of the device, only a couple of months after it started getting used. So I'm quite happy with the separate layers at the moment. Now, we're getting into less certain, but the more pro Mac Mini is also expected here. Reportedly, this one was actually in the boxes and ready to ship in October at the same time as the MacBooks Pro with the M1 Pro and M1 Max chips, but Apple decided to wait so that they could sell more MacBooks. Now, I'm sure there are some people who would have preferred the desktop and still bought a MacBook Pro instead at the time, but it's impossible to know if this was a good move for Apple or not. I'm sure there are those who bought the Mac Mini at the beginning of the Apple Silicon transition just because it had the lowest price point, but a Mac Mini certainly fills a different role to the MacBook in most cases. This new one, of course, is expected to get the new design, the M1 Pro and M1 Max SoCs inside, and now we're getting into real speculation territory here. But what would go better with a Mac Mini M1 Max than a delightful new display? Well, as discovered by Luke Miani, their shipping dates for Apple's Pro Display XDR have just slipped out to March the 3rd to March the 10th, which conveniently wraps around Apple's event that we're hoping will be a month today, the 8th of March. Could we be finally seeing Apple's first consumer displays in years? Now, I wouldn't expect the 3 sizes we've been hearing about to all arrive this soon, as the chances are that the display has been one of the big stumbling blocks in terms of the larger iMacs. But a display that uses the same 24-inch iMac panel that we have right now could well be revealed, I'm sure. And now, because we mentioned the iMac, in the worst news, it looks like the iMac, the bigger iMac, which I'm deliberately not calling the iMac Pro, is most likely delayed until at least the summer, so WWDC at the soonest, but more likely to come later in the year. Apple doesn't define between their 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros in terms of naming, so I don't think they would do the same for the iMac. However, I do think there will be a multiple SoC version of the iMac, which will be that iMac Pro. Also, the iPad Pro and anything else with M2 inside is probably not going to be coming in March either. I still want to believe that it is, but I'm just not sure anymore. But an iPhone, an iPad or two, a Mac Mini, and even maybe a standalone display is a decent amount, and Apple may well have software announcements too. Perhaps iOS and macOS operating system updates will be ready for prime time, and Apple wants to shout about Mask ID and Universal Control again for the launch. Only time will tell on those, just not as much time as we're about a month out now. But what do you think we'll see? Am I on the money or miles off? Let me know down in the comments. And into a couple of iCave answers before we round out the show. First of all, Yuri Tech asks iCave answers, as an iPad user, should I save up for an M1 MacBook Air or the new iPad? My friends and people have suggested that I save up for a MacBook instead. And honestly, Yuri, this one completely comes down to what do you need and what iPad do you already have. If you've got an iPad that you can use still for content consumption, then a MacBook will give you more flexibility in terms of doing video editing. I know you make videos on YouTube as well. It will give you the option of using something like Final Cut instead of just using iMovie or using LumaFusion, which you can actually use on your MacBook and on an iPad. I don't know how old your iPad is. If it's still usable for content consumption, that's probably a good use for it, and a MacBook would be a great buy. If you're on a really tight budget, the most recent iPad base model is a really, really good buy, but I'd probably wait a month because it looks like we might have a new one coming. Whether that's going to be a full-on spec bump or not, I don't know, but I probably wouldn't be buying this month. But in all honesty, if you are satisfied with what you can create and the usefulness of your iPad right now, you don't necessarily need a MacBook. A lot of people buy MacBooks because they're used to using MacBooks. If you're used to using an iPad already and you're happy with the workflows, then, you know, it's up to you what you want to buy with your money. And Randomness R asks, iCave answers, where's the 15 to 16-inch MacBook Air? Also, rumours that the iPads will get notches too, and any news about M2 Pro or Max MacBook Pro release date. Okay, there's a lot to break down in this one. 15 to 16-inch MacBook Air. We've answered this a few times. We've talked about it a few times. I'm not certain that there is enough of a market for Apple to make it. I know that there's 6 or 7 people that keep asking for it. However, that's probably not quite enough to be a market for a product. The MacBook Air right now is just kind of thought of as the cheapest MacBook. I think that's why it's so popular. I don't think there's that many people going out and even putting the extra storage or extra memory into it. So I don't think that it's worthwhile going up to a bigger screen size, although it looks like Apple is quite happy to go from a 14 to a 16-inch for $200. So if it's a $200 bump, that might not be too bad. You'd be looking at $11.99 for a MacBook Air with a larger display, if that was the case. It might be compelling. I just don't think Apple's actually doing it at the minute. So, when's it coming? No time soon. Notches on iPad Pros. Now, this is a really controversial one. I had an extra thought today, so bear with me on this one. The first one is that if you put a notch on there, which side do you go on? Do you go on the landscape as being your primary, which is how Apple works it with their own smart keyboards, or do you put it on the top edge as we have it right now, just like on the iPhones? Neither is a great option. both is a worse option. The beauty of the way that the design is right now is that the bezel is thick enough all the way around, because you need something to hold when you're using an iPad, that we're able to hide the cameras and the Face ID sensors inside there. So that's not an issue. However, a lot of people seem to want thinner bezels. I think the practicality would suffer. There might also be technology that Apple is putting in there using maybe the neural engine to define between intentional and unintentional touches. We know that it's got palm rejection built in already, because Apple has used that in multiple different products over the years, be that the iPhone rejecting unintended touches, to palm rejection on trackpads, to palm rejection on the iPad when you're using something like the Apple Pencil. We know that Apple can use algorithms to work out whether you're intending to select something in an area or whether you're just holding it. So it could be that we actually get the thinner bezels all the way around, and the outer edge of the display, especially when you're in certain apps, is restricted space in terms of touch, but it can be used for display. That might be a possible solution. It does mean updating a whole bunch of apps, and we still don't know whether we would put the notch on the top in landscape or on the top in portrait mode. That's the weird question for me. And in terms of M2 Pro and Max MacBook Pros, that's certainly not going to be this year, I would assume. I don't want to say certain about anything anymore because everything keeps changing, but I would guess that the M2 base level will be out in the autumn, probably in October, and the M2 Pro and Max hopefully won't be as far away as the following autumn, but maybe in the spring of next year, or maybe, just later this year. Maybe we actually get to the point where everything gets updated together, or more together, or at least isn't just waiting for the sake of it. Fingers crossed. But anyway, guys, that's it for this show. Thank you to all the Patreons over here. If you want to get the Cupertino stuff, you know where to go. iCaveDave.com/merch. And thank you so much for watching.